appears safe. I go in without thinking. And all at once I'm disconnected from what's happening.
Let's move into Betroffenheit. That's the piece you're working on now at the Banff Centre. It's about to premiere at the Pan Am Games in Toronto.
Yeah.
Briefly, what's the story being told in Betroffenheit?
Betroffenheit indicates a kind of trauma, loss, shock, grief, a kind of suspended state where language, verbal language can't be used to explain or to describe or to express what's being felt. And so our show charts the journey of our protagonist through stages of trauma, loss, grief, addiction, and recovery. And at its core is Jonathon Young's own personal story of loss and trauma, but the piece also moves outwards and encompasses a kind of universal question of suffering and survival. And so for me, when I think about creating the piece, I've been thinking about zooming out and zooming in a way. So zooming out to the universal and zooming in to this one particular story, this one particular person dealing with something. And so when I think about that zooming in and zooming out, then I feel like we have the opportunity to connect and have access for lots of different people. So in our show, we talk about addiction, and in our show, we have a stand-in for substance. A stand-in for substance is showtime. And there's a show within the show is a kind of variety show, and this variety show is kind of is a stand-in for this idea of addiction, substance abuse. And so when showtime infiltrates the world of the show, there's a sense of pleasure and a sense of relief, and I think that the audience is going to go on that same ride as our protagonist does.
So all the pain gets moments of levity.
Yeah, and becomes a really delicious distraction. And yet, as showtime progresses, it becomes dangerous, it becomes unhealthy, it gets dark, it twists, and we ultimately discover that it's the wrong outcome.
Wow. You were here in Banff last year, first beginning to work on this piece, and we had a chance to talk to you back then. So to both you and Jonathon, the co-artistic creator, or the co-creator of the show, we have a bit of tape from that. So let's take a moment and take a look at where your head was at when you first started working on this project.
This is the first time I'm working with an actual playwright, actual writer, in parallel together along the line of a process. So it's a very different experience.
I found this word Betroffenheit, which is a German word that we don't really have an equivalent for in English, which sort of describes a state of shock or aftermath. The piece begins post-accident, which so far hasn't really been named. How close can I get to turning what happened in my life into art without feeling like I'm using it? We're calling it an image language system as opposed to a play or a piece of modern dance.
The writing is becoming more confounding and more exciting with every day that goes by.
How much story can you have without words, without a real solid premise, and still call it modern dance, right? What are the boundary lines there? When does physical action turn into narrative action?
So first question.
Yeah.
That was very early in the process.
Yeah.
There's lots of imagery there, weird things and darkness and lights moving around. How much has the actual product changed since you were first here with this?
Well, what we were working on there was one particular scene,
Okay.
and that'll happen in the show, I think.
Yeah.
We're going to find that out in a couple days. So we were experimenting in our technical time on stage with this one particular scene and how we might stage it. And so, we were actually just playing with a flashlight and some kind of, structures on stage, just seeing how that might read. When we came to Banff and worked on in that residency, we had no content yet. Like we had the script, which was in process, but we hadn't actually built any choreography. We hadn't actually staged any scenes or anything. So it was us just experimenting with lights and sound, and we had David and Tiffany there, two dancers from the project, to animate the space and to improvise within it, and just to give a human dimension to our technical time, which was great. But we weren't actually coming to Banff at that point with any material.
Do you always start the same way, or because of this process with a playwright involved, there's a new way to start?
I love starting a process with technical time, which is strange because normally you put technical time at the end of a process. You make the piece in the studio, and then you move it into the theater, and then you make all the lighting and everything, and then you premiere it. That's usually the way things go. But in an ideal world, and many things about this project have been ideal, you do some tech time at the beginning of a process, because then you discover things that you can then integrate into your studio time, and you make space for it. The tendency for me anyway is, without that tech time, is to choreograph the thing to the last fingernail. And then there ends up being very little space left for theatrical elements to come in. And so I really like to have a sense of what those possibilities are at the beginning of a process. And even now, I mean, we're in the theater now here, but we haven't actually started lighting yet. There are gaps in the show that I know that I'm going to leave until we get on stage. Because I think that the light itself and the set itself need to do a dance. And I can't really choreograph that until we get there.
It deserves its own place.
Yeah. It's powerful stuff, and I need to leave room for it. Yeah.
So you've wanted to work with a playwright. This is the first time you get to work with a playwright.
Yeah.
So very literally bringing narrative as part of the structure of how you build a story.
Yeah. Narrative or let's say... Yeah, narrative, yes. Let's say narrative. I'm just trying to think, because our show doesn't really follow a linear narrative per se.
Right.
But there's definitely a lot of story imbued in it. Does that make sense? It's hard to explain without seeing.
Well, it brings a different perspective of that into the fold, right?
Yeah.
So you imagine this is a process you wanted to indulge in, now you're in it. What's the process been like working with Jonathon?
Incredible. It's been totally incredible. It's been so inspiring. It's been so challenging. He's a very, very curious person. He has a very nimble mind, and he's incredibly open and courageous. So that's all been so inspiring for me and for all of the people that have been working on this project, dancers and design team and everybody.
So if I'm going to just reduce it, is it that you're working with words in a different way and he's working with movement in a different way, and that's how you're working together on discovering? Yeah,
I would say so. So we've been experimenting with lots of different ways to work with text in this production. There are many voices in the show, many voices, but they're all Jonathan's voice. So a lot of the text is pre-recorded, and he is in dialogue with his own voice, his own mind. And sometimes those voices are delivered through objects, speakers or doorways or light bulbs, so you hear the voice being embodied in a light bulb, for example, or you'll see the voice being embodied in a dancer. And so we've had a lot of fun working with text and using it as a kind of music and trying to animate it with the physical. Sometimes the dancers actually lip sync to his words, and sometimes they dance to his words, and sometimes they do both. And I've been really enjoying that process of working with the music of the language.
Yeah.
And having the music of the language and the content of the language and the dancer all come together in a moment is so satisfying.
It's a story of, like you said, loss, and there's darkness and tragedy and pain and all that stuff in this piece, with a bit of joy and levity to contrast it out. But I think Jonathon's also referred to it as a farce about PTSD. Does that still hold true?
I wouldn't say so.
Not anymore?
No, but although we are interested in PTSD, and we've done a lot of research about what people with PTSD are experiencing, and trying to find ways to express that or to embody that in the show. The farcical nature of it, at one point we were thinking about using actually like the format of farce to be our show, what I was talking about earlier.
The variety.
The variety show that's within the show that is like a stand-in for substance abuse. But we discovered that it was, the farce idea was sort of morphed into something else. And it morphed into this variety show idea where we have a series of acts that follow one another, just as they would in a variety show. Yeah. So I think the farce idea kind of got swallowed up in that. But all that is to say, though, there's a lot of humor in the piece. It's very, very funny at times, and very joyful, which has been a wonderful surprise to me. You know, looking at the content we were going to be dealing with, I was wondering,
where's this going?
Yeah, and so I'm so delighted and so surprised to find so much joy within it.